Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Sue. I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 28, 2009. Welcome, everyone, to today's Threads of Recovery workshop. I have stated I am an alcoholic. Do we have any other alcoholics in the meeting? Hello and welcome, everyone. Let's invite God into this meeting with a moment of silence, followed by the set-aside prayer. Thank you. The set-aside prayer. Lord, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything that I think I know about myself, everything that I know about my fellows, everything I think I know about my own recovery, for a much needed new experience in you, myself, and my fellows, and a new experience in my own recovery. Help me see the truth. Amen. 1058 Threads of Recovery Home Group meets Monday nights at 5:30 p.m. in St. Louis, Missouri. Due to internet issues at our meeting place, the 5:30 p.m. Monday night speaker meeting will be in person only. We welcome you to attend when you are in the St. Louis area. We would love to welcome you in person. We will continue to offer virtual workshops every weekday. To be included in our monthly newsletter and weekly email, send a request to threads1058@gmail.com. This will keep you up to date on all our workshops being offered. Our group follows the 12 traditions. We stick to our singleness of purpose, and we ask everyone to please refrain from the use of profanity when sharing. The 7th tradition states that Alcoholics Anonymous is self-supporting through our own contributions. The contributions help to cover the group's expenses, but the 7th tradition is more than simply paying for rent and other groups' expenses. It is both a privilege and a responsibility of individual groups and members to ensure that our organization at every level remains forever self-supporting and free of outside influences that might divert us from our primary purpose. The monetary amount of each contribution is secondary to the spiritual connection that joins us in unity with AA groups around the world. To virtually contribute, our home group electronic basket is on Venmo, which is @ThreadsGroup. This is an open meeting. Open meetings are available to anyone interested in Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery from alcoholism. Non-alcoholics may attend open meetings as observers. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Please help me welcome Don M. and Steve L. And Steve L., it's all yours.
Thank you, Sue, and good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Lee. I'm an alcoholic. And I can't tell you how thrilled Don and I are to be here with you guys tonight. I know some of you on the flyer, you'd seen that Bob B. was going to be here, and Bob was unable to make it, but I was so grateful that Don, my sponsor, was willing to step in and step up. And I asked Don because, as you will discover if you haven't already heard, I think that his insights and take on step 6 and 7 are some of my favorites, even though you may hear us come to things, a couple of things from a little different point of view, which is, I think, always, I think there's a lot of room for us here for that type of discussion and points of view, and we all just share our own experience. I'm going to read the 2 paragraphs of step 6 and 7 and then bring Don in to share with us for about half an hour or so. And then, as I understand it, I'll talk for a little while, and then we'll do what you guys do every week. But we land here at this step 6, after having done the 5th step, right? And then if we're kind of paying attention to the book, we have, sought out some of that quiet time and considered those first 5 proposals and ask ourselves if I'm trying to make mortar without sand, and if I've left anything out. And And if I can answer to my satisfaction, if I feel like I'm on pretty solid ground, I haven't intentionally scrimped at anything. It says that if I can answer to my satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. We are now ready to let God remove from us all things which we have admitted are objectionable. Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we'll not let go of, we ask God to help us be willing. And then when ready, we say something like this: my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. It says, then we've completed step 7. Now, but I would say I believe that step 6 and 7 are about as simple and straightforward as those 2 paragraphs, but my relationship to them are ongoing, and the spiritual surrender attached to those is something that continues to reveal itself over time. And I'll talk about that some more, but I wanted to let Don go first. I asked him if he would so I could listen closely to what he said and then repurpose some of his language and claim it for my own in the back half of this meeting, because your attention spans aren't enough that you will remember what he said in the back half, so I can repeat it even more effectively than he did and get credit for it. So it is really my pleasure, and I'm very grateful to Don for joining us tonight. Don, take it away. You're muted. You're muted, Don.
Not anymore. Hi, everybody. My name's Don, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm really grateful to be with you folks. Pinch hitting for my sponsor, Bob. I'm afraid you guys traded down, but we'll do the best we can with it. And thank you, Steve, for kicking us off there, and Sue for chairing, and Mike for setting it up and working on it. But I'm just kind of going to move pretty quickly to step 6 and 7. I almost killed myself with alcohol. Alcohol dominated everything in my life for 25 years. I stumbled upstairs for about 20 years. And then for the last 5 years, I lost literally everything. Didn't see my only child for over 3 years, lost my law license. My law partners had to kick me out of the firm that I had founded. Had a new wife, and while I was going to the asylum 18 times in 2.5 years, she had to leave me on account of my insanity, and she was staying with some girlfriends and died in an accident. I lived without an address for a year. I didn't sleep on the street, but the only reason on earth I didn't was that I could always get somebody to take me in, and it was often strangers. And I'd washed up in Nashville, Tennessee in the fall of 1980. My sobriety date's April 9th of 81. And I washed up in Nashville 6 months before I got sober. And I wound up at a clubhouse there called the 202 Club that's still in existence, and Steve knows well in Nashville. And God gave me in April of 1981 the greatest gift that I've ever had or that I will ever have. And it was no change of my mind, no change of my thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. I didn't know anything had changed. And it was only by looking in the rearview mirror weeks, months, years, and sometimes decades after the fact that I knew everything had changed. And what had changed was that for the very first time in my life, I began to voluntarily follow suggestions about how to run my life. Even though I didn't understand these suggestions, I didn't agree with them. I didn't think they'd work, and I certainly did not want to do them. And I was 37 years old and had never done a single thing in my life that checked all those boxes until then. And folks, that behaving better than my thoughts, feelings, beliefs that I'm for an awful long time have My pet name for my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs is the old crazy picture show in the back of my head. And behaving better than that old crazy picture show in the back of my head is the only reason in the world I'm with you folks tonight, pinch hitting for Bob, instead of having been rotting in a pauper's grave somewhere in Tennessee for about 40 years. But those guys in Nashville, when the miracle of me following directions, getting sober, took place, they gave me wonderful direction. My sponsor was a man by the name of Cherry Carpenter, not Cherry, but Cherry. And they led me through step 3, finally got it through my head that step 3 was not a process. There were no movie rights to be considered in step 3, that it was a simple decision to it, and it turns nothing over to God. It's not designed to. It's simply a decision to embark on a course of behavior, which will indeed, if we persist in it, turn our will and lives over to God. They got me through my 4th and 5th step. I did that, and I formed a picture of what a spiritual dawn ought to look like. And I went back to my attic. I had my very own attic at that time, which was a real step up for me. And I followed directions exactly. Somebody had given me a Timex watch. So I timed exactly 1 hour that I spent reviewing the first 5 steps. And it didn't look like I was summa cum laude, but it looked like I'd done okay. So I got down on my knees and I said the 7th step prayer and believed with all my heart that that was the point in my recovery where with God's help, I'd gotten that far. I went to work on me to make me into what I had decided a spiritual dawn ought to be. And you can be assured that my idea of a spiritual dawn didn't have any of the character defects that were hurting my self-centered butt and embarrassing me. And I rolled that way for 9 years sober. And those 9 years were enchanted. It's really just humanly impossible to get from where God took me in April of 1981 for the following 9 years. It's just impossible. As a byproduct of steps 8 and 9, my law license got put back in order. I went back to Louisville because I couldn't find a minimum wage job in Nashville to try to practice law, terrified. 2nd month, I was back in Louisville. At 22 months sober, they stuck me up in front of 2,000 people to talk. Recorded it, went out everywhere, and people started asking me to speak and travel and be their sponsor and that sort of thing. And that same month, I saw my daughter for the first time in over 3 years. And she moved in with me 2 months later and lived with me throughout her high school years. And she and I are dear friends. We were in touch every single day. So and I started making some money practicing law. I was sponsoring literally an embarrassing number of people, literally a large room full. And my behavior and my life in regard to my relationships with women was about like a really fickle 13-year-old. If any woman that I found the least bit of any interest in me, I'd pass a lie detector test when I tearfully proclaimed undying love, meant it from the soles of my feet. 10 days, 2 weeks later, I'd wake up and think, if I don't get away from her right now, I'm going to die. I'm talking about not 10 minutes now, I've got to go. And you keep doing that, and it will undermine your image of spiritual childhood. And the other thing that almost killed me that first 9 years was financial chaos. The more money I would make seemed like the worse the chaos got. I mean, I was doing my nice step deal. I was paying off the wreckage of my past. But the chaos was still with me. And I worked so hard on it. And I did not have bad intentions. I had noble intentions. I didn't want a harem. I wanted a monogamous relationship with a woman who had a spiritual basis, where she and I could just cooperate with and live with one another in peace and live our lives and be useful. And I didn't want to be wealthy, good thing, because never have been. I just wanted the craziness to stop. And the tools I was using were impeccable. I was using prayer, steps, sponsors, meetings, outside counseling. And what I would do, whatever character defect was embarrassing me and making me uncomfortable, I would kind of figuratively corner it and say, God, I got it over here. Come here, just give me a little help and we'll get rid of that thing. And God never came for 9 years. And I had no idea what was wrong there. In May of 1990, something happened that involved my getting a new sponsor and spending a weekend in Cleveland. And I began to look at step 6 and 7 in an entirely different way. If you had asked me when I got on the plane that Sunday of that weekend to come back home, what had happened that weekend, I would not have said anything. I'd probably have mentioned step 6 and 7 along with other things. But I wouldn't have said, oh my God, I've had a turning point in my life that's going to change my life unbelievably. But God gave me some help. On Tuesday, after I got back to Louisville, I went to a noon meeting I hadn't been to in a couple of years, and it had been just a straight discussion meeting. But I walked in and they had changed it to a step meeting. They were talking about 6 and 7. That weekend, I took the gal I was dating on my motorcycle to the Smoky Mountains for the weekend. On Saturday, it was just pouring rain. I wanted to go to a meeting. She had better sense. So I get on my rain gear and get on the motorcycle and start riding over a couple of mountains to find a meeting. I get to where the meeting's supposed to be and nobody's there. So I'm standing there in the rain and a local cop drives by and I waved him down. And he said, I don't know where the AA meeting is either, but this old nun that lives a couple of blocks over has always been involved with AA. She'll know. So I got on the motorcycle and followed the cop to the old nun's house that she knew. And about halfway, when the meeting was halfway over, I walked in looking like a drowned rat. And sure enough, it was a step meeting discussing 6 and 7. And I began to realize, and the word realize has been so important to me in sobriety. Until I got sober, I thought to realize something or to know it were essentially the same thing. And then I didn't relate it. Realize is a form of the word real. When I've realized something, that literally means it's been brought into reality inside me. And there's all sorts of stuff I've known for 70 years that I have not been brought into reality inside me. And I began to realize that I'd missed just about all the boats on step 6 and 7. The first big boat I missed is the book doesn't say a thing about me working on me. It talks about God removing things. So it turned out that rather than being where I started working on myself, 6 and 7 were where I gave up on me working on myself. And I came back to God like a little child, like a third step on steroids, and said, Mom, Dad, I don't know where we are or how we got here, and I sure don't know where we're supposed to go. And I know you'll never light my path with a floodlight so I can see road, but I believe you'll light it with a pin light for my next single step. And I'm going to quit trying to figure out these patterns, because all my life I thought the way to approach anything was let me figure out the pattern so I will know where to start stitching. Well, I'm 77 years old now, and I haven't figured out a single significant pattern correctly. A chimpanzee has got a better chance of mastering quantum physics than I do of understanding and predicting the patterns of my life. It's way above my capacity. My job is stitching, listening to that little spark of the divine, that little part of God that's in each one of us for that single next stage. And for me, the essence of faith is taking that next stage, that next action where in my heart, I know it's the right place. And that divine spark that I call it, that has got many names. We call it conscience, but we call it moral compass. We call it better angels. Conventional Christians often call it the Holy Spirit. But by any name, it's a part of God that I believe is in each one of us that lights my path with a pen light for a single step. So the next thing I had wrong, although the time that I spent praying in good faith for God to take character defects that I wanted gone, I might as well have been praying to be chairman of the board of General Motors. I was praying for my own selfish ends. The book tells us that that doesn't work. We can easily see why. It took me 9 years to easily see why I couldn't effectively pray for a character defect to be gone because I wanted it gone. The 7-step prayer that we read going into this doesn't ask God to remove all of our defects of character. And it certainly doesn't ask God to remove the ones that I want gone, or the ones that are inconsistent with my little idea of what a spiritual Don ought to be. I look back on it now, and what arrogance that I would know who and what God wants me to be. God doesn't give me big chunks and say, Don, here's what I want you to be. God says, Don, this is the next thing I want you to do. Leave the rest of it to me. I'm in charge of the pattern. It asks, of course, only that God removes every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to God and my fellows. And it's not just the 6th and 7th step. That is the heart and the soul of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what it's about. That's our main purpose. Early in the book, we're told that as ex-problem drinkers, our very lives depend upon the constant thought of others and how we may best help them. 3rd step prayer, take away my difficulties, not so I can be sober and spiritual and happy, but take away my difficulties, that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help of God's power, love, and way of life. 8th and 9th step, all practical, putting our lives in order, right? Look on page 77. It says, yes, we are doing that, but it's not our real purpose. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those around us. Folks, it's like my AA hero Chuck Chamberlain said, if I do this for me so I can be sober, spiritual, and happy, it may work well enough and I may be okay, but I'm going to rob myself. Because the real joy, the whole Megillah, comes when I'm doing it to try to be useful to God's kids and trying to help God's kids do what they need to have done and letting God take care of me and behaving like a person would behave if they believed, if they keep taking that next stitch in the right place, keep trying to do the next right thing. Keep correcting when we stumble, getting up and stumbling in that right direction. And to this day, I start over sometimes 50 or 100 times a day, and that's fine. If my God had wanted me capable of perfection, he would have at least made me capable of recognizing it, which God did not. And he would have made me capable of attaining it. And really, I had my problem with perfection wrong. I thought it was my inability to attain it, and I certainly am unable to attain it, But that's never really mattered. My problem's deeper than that. I can't recognize perfection. I wouldn't know it if it came riding through my living room on a motor scooter. If God came down right now and said, Don, you're 77, been sober 40 years. You just tell me who and what you're supposed to be for the rest of the time you've got left, maybe till next Tuesday at this point. And I'm going to make you that. I truly would be like a blind dog in a butcher shop. I would have no idea what on earth to tell God who and what to make me. But at any rate, and part of 6 and 7, which have been the most important steps for me in my life every single day since May of 1990, 31 years. And part of that is behaving like a person would behave if they weren't trying to take care of themselves, but they were just trying to help God's kids do what they need to have done, and were trusting God to take care of them. And also a big part of it is the prayer of St. Francis, particularly the part of, Lord, please let me seek to love, comfort, and understand rather than to be loved, comforted, and understood. And I think the second part of that is more important and sometimes more difficult, because at first I've got to get out of the frame of mind that I want you to love, comfort, and understand me before I can even consider loving, comfort, and understand you. And I've discovered over the years that, at least for me, if any part of me is seeking to be loved, comforted, and understood, and that includes things like making sure you respect me and making dang sure you don't step on my rights. If any part of me is coming from there, it's an absolute spiritual law that I will not feel loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction. It simply cannot happen. If you do exactly what I started out wanting you to do, before you're done, I'll change it. Because I'm trying to get you to fill up a God-shaped hole in me. And there's no way on earth you can do it. And the only way it's possible for me to feel loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction is when I truly am just beating that prayer of St. Francis silently through my head before and during my human contacts. I've done it a dozen times since this meeting started, until the magic happens, till I'm no longer thinking about me. I'm no longer thinking about what kind of impression I'm making on you. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next. I'm not thinking about 3 or 4 different unrelated things while I'm nodding at you and going, mm-hmm. I'm giving you my entire interest, attention, and love. And I can just feel the shift. It's like a shift in the atmosphere when I run that through my head and it clicks. And I really am interested in you and what I can do for you. It changes absolutely everything. Now, when I go down to my law office and try to win cases, make money, look good, cover my butt, I wind up in the snake pit, like Chuck says, every single time. But when I go down there and try to help God's kids do what they need to have done, God turned out to be a whole lot better lawyer than I am. And I thought it was pretty good in the first 10 years. But God turned out better. And my life has been so much better, approaching it that way in every area of my life. When I got back to town in May of 1990 after that trip, one of the things I did, I had admired this beautiful redhead whose daughter went to school with my daughter. I had admired her ever since I'd known her for 7 years. But I let go of trying to figure out the qualifications for a mate for me. At one time in early sobriety, I had a list of 42 things that a woman needed to be. Girl walked by with a cute butt and checked all of the boxes. You never saw such a mess in your life as that was. But I let go of any idea. And I said, God, I'm going to behave. I'm going to behave like a person would behave. If they're perfectly all right, if they don't ever have a solid relationship in their lives. And I'm going to apply this love, comfort, and understanding thing to that, just like everything else. And I called Sharon and left her a voicemail, and she called me back. And we started dating, and we have been married for 30 years now with no intervening separations or divorces. We have never had an argument. And we are unfailingly courteous to one another. And courtesy is a big part of living the 6th and 7th step for me. I believe it's impossible for me to be discourteous and spiritual at the same time. I just don't think it can happen. And there's no excuse for me ever being discourteous. Having been a criminal defense lawyer all my adult life and sponsoring, working with a lot of alcoholics, I have to tell people some really unpleasant things, some really ugly things, but I can do it courteously. And you know, if I'm always courteous, I almost never get into any conflict. If I maintain courtesy, and it's so important that I do it at home and with the people closest to me. I think it's so sad that often it's easier for us to be courteous to strangers than it is the people we live with, the people we're the very closest with. And I believe that every little sharp remark, every little sarcastic barb, maybe flying under the flag of humor, I think every one of those things leaves a mark. And I think they build and build and build. So courtesy is a huge part of seeking to love, comfort, and understand. Another thing about my character defects is my character defects are no longer the old crazy picture showing the back of my head. If I required that be straightened out in order for my character defects to be under control, I'd be in bad shape. The old crazy picture show is alive and well. My character defects today are what I do, not what goes through my mind. And that is such good news, because the one power that God gives me in this universe is over my own next action. So I can do that next right thing, regardless of what's going on in my mind. And I have no immediate control over my mind. I don't have a magic wand to wave and say, Don, change your mind. No longer be lustful, no longer be greedy, or feel lustful, or feel greedy. But I've got that divine spark that tells me not to take that next stitch in a greedy or lustful manner. And I can control the behavior. And that is my character defects. Now, in every area of my life, not just my wonderful relationship with Sharon, it's worked in everything in my life. The bar association that I so brought into disrepute. When I lost my license, it wasn't whatever happened to Don Majors on the front page of the Louisville paper. And I gave the bar a terrible black eye. When they let me in, it was by one little vote of the Board of Governors of the Bar Association letting me in. They have honored me until it's embarrassing. Lawyer of the Year. They have given me the most coveted award, the award for professionality and civility. They made me a master at Inn of Court, which is a big legal honorary thing. And I'm one of the only 3 masters emeritus there are now. They may put me on a committee to interview people who wanted to be judge and pass on whether they're qualified. They made me chair of that committee. And God's got such a sense of humor. About 15 years ago, I was sitting in the barber chair and my cell phone rang. And it was the president of the state bar. And he said, Don, we've got an opening on the ethics committee. The only people on earth that I was more afraid of the first 10 years I practiced law than the State Bar Ethics Committee were the IRS and the FBI. But all those things have just worked out beautifully. And it's really important that to me, that'll let you know that in the 31 years since May of 1990, I don't think there's been one single day that if you had asked me, Don, have you done this 6 and 7 deal well enough that it will do any good, that I would have said, I think I might have made it today. Every day it had been on. I had to start over 50 or 100 times, just persisting. And I've been convinced for a long time that courtesy and persistence are the 2 most under-discussed and underrated of all spiritual traits. God didn't wire me for perfection, but God will allow me to persist. And finally, about 6 and 7, I believe the reason that they are so difficult is that it is so simple. It's so simple that our brains and egos just rebel and say, no. The whole key to a useful, peaceful, successful life has got to have a whole lot more input from me than that. And it feels like a death of self. It's been so ingrained in us that what we need to do is, by God, envision it and grab the bulls by the horn and make it happen. That's so ingrained in us that letting go of it feels like a death of self. But death of self, it turns out, is a really, really good thing. Thank you all so much. And now that I've run my mouth, we'll get to hear some real substance with my dear friend Steve taking over.